What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackball. When 9/11 happened, a lot of new things sort of started to encompass our political and our justice systems. And one of those things happens to be the Guantanamo Bay prison facility in Cuba. Many people were rounded up in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, sent to Guantanamo Bay or GITMO and other black sites, in fact, CIA black sites around the world for interrogation, oftentimes completely unjust and unwarranted. And what was placed inside the justice system was almost like a vacuum of sorts, where human rights attorneys would have to come in and try to deal with the ominous task of trying to defend people that many Americans felt didn't deserve defending, despite the fact that they may have been innocent. And one such person is Alka Pradhan. She is our guest today. Alka, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
How are you?
I'm well.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking. I've been spending a lot of time at Guantanamo this year.
That's right. I interviewed one of your partners, in fact, last year, I remember, from GITMO, which was really interesting. His name escapes me right now. I'm really sorry. But back in February, you tweeted the following. You said, "Today we filed a giant brief before GITMO Military Commission about the USG's torture program brutalized, how the USG's torture program brutalized Ammar al-Baluchi. Sorry, I'm trying to remember that from memory. Into compliance over 3.5 years at a black site, and then engineered harsh conditions to maintain his spear of torture while pretending to do clean interviews at GITMO." Who did you present that brief to exactly, and what is the process? And if we can speak a little bit about the details of that brief as much as you can, that'd be amazing.
Yes, of course. So I'd have to take you back just a little bit. So the 9/11 case has been in pretrial hearings for roughly 12 years, since 2012. There has never been a trial for 9/11. And this brief, like what we're talking about, is actually the reason why. So that's why I want to give you a little bit of background on this. Beginning in 2012, the defense teams, the defense attorneys for these men who have been charged, said, listen, we need all of the information about how our clients were treated when they were at the CIA black sites. Because as you know, a lot of these men were, and actually everyone who's being prosecuted at the military commissions, were held by the CIA for a number of years and just absolutely brutally tortured at these various sites all around the world. We know, of course, about the waterboarding, but that's only one very small part of it. And so we said, look, when they were brought to Guantanamo from the black sites, then they were re-interviewed or re-interrogated by FBI agents, despite the fact that they'd spent years at the CIA black sites being interrogated constantly, every day, literally, at the same time, concurrent with their torture. And so they're re-interrogated when they're brought to Guantanamo by the FBI. And the statements they made to the FBI at Guantanamo form the bulk of the government's evidence against these men in this death penalty case. And so how they were treated at the black sites and what the FBI knew about their treatment at the black sites and what they said under torture is very, very relevant to the reliability and, the veracity and the voluntariness of the statements they made at Guantanamo Bay. And so over the course of several years, we have been litigating this issue. In what this is called in litigation is suppression. It's a motion to suppress those statements as the product of torture. Now, we filed an initial brief on this 5 years ago in 2019. At the time, we didn't have a lot of information about the connection between the CIA and the FBI in getting these statements and sort of forming the conditions to get these sorts of inculpatory statements. And so we filed a brief that had information about what we knew about what had happened to Mr. al-Baluchi at the black sites and then at Guantanamo. But then the judge, I had a series of judges. The judge then ordered witness testimony on this. And so we've had FBI agents come and testify. We've had doctors come and testify about what happened at the black sites and what the impact was. And so we had our current judge ordered us to file a supplement incorporating the new information. And that is what that tweet was about. We filed a massive supplement in February. And that brief is 200 and some pages long. which really tells the story of how this was one long government torture program intended to get inculpatory information from these men to use in this death penalty case. So that's the sort of in a nutshell background.
That's actually a perfect nutshell because it makes me the first question that comes to mind just after you make that statement is that the CIA and FBI torture program was that by design? In other words, did they want to soften them up at the black sites and then get them to admit things once they transferred them to GITMO, or was it kind of a freestyle improvisation act?
So initially at the black sites, there was no intention to prosecute any of these men. And that was a deliberate US government decision. There was never going to be a trial for 9/11. They were going to hold these men at the black sites more or less forever. And a few years in, so at that point, that's to say that the interrogation at that point was just to get information, which is why they felt empowered to use these techniques and use unauthorized techniques and go even beyond the torture that was authorized, right, by the Department of Justice at the black sites. And they really spent 3.5 to 4 years breaking these men, right? Then it became clear that the black sites were unsustainable. Various countries didn't want to participate. They didn't, like our allies were sort of throwing up their hands and saying we don't want a part of this. And so we needed to bring them somewhere. Guantanamo was the best place. At Guantanamo, these guys are more visible, right? I mean, it's still kind of a black hole, but at that point in Guantanamo in 2006, there were attorneys present. The ICRC was there. There was a little bit more visibility there. It would have been impossible to bring them there and disappear them completely, right? It would have been noticed. And so at that point, you have President Bush in September 2006 making this major speech saying, listen, acknowledging the rendition and detention program for the first time, saying we've had these black sites abroad. We've now brought these men to Guantanamo. Now we are going to have a trial for 9/11, right? And so we're working backwards a little bit to say, now we're having a trial. Where do we get the evidence from? Right. And so they're brought in September 2006 to Guantanamo. At that point, they've been making statements to the CIA the whole time. Then in January and February 2007, they're reinterrogated by the FBI. They make statements to the FBI that are then used. So this is sort of, we're really working backwards here to get the evidence necessary for a 9/11 trial.
Yeah, it's a little backwards. And also your client, Amar al-Baluchi, he seemed more attractive to the CIA and the FBI because he's the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He was also, I believe, the detainee that Zero Dark 30 was based off of at the beginning when they put him at the black site, and these guys didn't even. There was veteran interrogators there, and then people that had never really interrogated anybody that were interrogating him, and they got the Bush Doctrine memo or whatever it was that allowed enhanced interrogation techniques, which is just another way of saying torture. Like you could strike people, you could take advantage of their fears and phobias with insects and things like that, sleep deprivation. My question is, before we get into, hopefully we can discuss parts of the briefing and the conclusion of the supplement. Why has the government ever gone on record and said why they were so resistant to holding trials inside the United States or housing them in prisons inside the United States? Is the easy answer because they didn't want them to have the rights that would come with that?
No, what the government's position has been on this, and it's come out through some of their witnesses, has been, listen, immediately post 9/11, we were still in sort of a high security, high sort of panic posture, right? And so we were not interested in due process and all of that. What we wanted was intelligence about the next attack, about what we thought was coming down the pipeline, which from a security perspective, right, is somewhat understandable. But, right, number one, we know torture doesn't work, right? The implementation of torture is solely for revenge. There is no way, we had known for hundreds of years at this point, that if you actually want actionable intelligence, you do not use these techniques. And we chose to use these techniques anyway. Now, the other issue is that once you make that decision that you're not going to prosecute them and therefore are going to use these particular techniques, holding them incommunicado for years, no access to a lawyer, torturing them, sleep deprivation, all of that, you don't get then get to have it both ways and later say, we're going to prosecute them, right? The damage is done by that point.
Is there anything that suggests that the fear of torture would deter other people from taking from raising arms or attacking the United States, like through the fear of what they might do if they were caught? Is there any evidence to suggest something like that?
Not really. I mean, I'm I know that I can tell you that the men in custody, once they were tortured, were absolutely terrified. And this is actually borne out from unclassified statements by CIA officials who were the interrogators, who said Amar said whatever he had to say to stop being mock drowned, right? I mean, there's actually a statement from someone saying that. So, certainly when they were in custody that happened, but um I think, look, if you're going to commit a crime, it comes with some understanding that if you're caught, terrible things might happen to you. I don't know that there was a specific deterrent that, hey, if the United States catches you, they're going to torture you, right? I think
Yeah.
there's a certain mindset that comes with committing a crime.
Okay, so the briefing and the supplement, 270 pages. That's I'm not a lawyer. That sounds like a very large supplement to me. But I mean, it's 20 years or something in the making. Is there? Can you tell me what the conclusion, if that's how it's laid out, of that supplement is, and how it bolsters the original briefing, and then what kind of? Because I know you can't really dig in too deep, but what are the headers of the sections of the supplement that you spoke about or that you wrote about for the court?
Yeah, let me tell you the difference between what we filed 5 years ago and what we filed now, right? What we filed 5 years ago was we had information at that point about the sites in which Mr. Albalucci had been held. He was held in 5 different sites, and we had some information about what techniques were being used on him at those sites and what his general health and mindset was. Then, separately, we had information about what statements he was making at those sites. We couldn't put the two together, like what he was saying as he was being, water doused or whatever.
Right.
And what we also didn't really quite know is where the statements were coming from. Like, what was the context? What were the questions being asked? We knew that some of the questions were coming from the FBI, right? Were being sent to the black sites to be asked of Mr. Albalucci while he was being tortured by the same FBI agents who later interviewed him at Guantanamo. So they knew what he had said under torture.
Mhm.
So fast forward 5 years, and what we have been able to do in this supplement is paint a much fuller picture of, listen, Mr. Albalucci is captured in April 2003 and disappeared almost immediately. He is almost immediately tortured, right? First in his place of capture in Pakistan, and then at a series of black sites after that, including the infamous Cobalt, which is described in the Senate report as a dungeon, right?
Right.
What we've been able to do through FBI testimony is put together not just here's what was asked of Mr. Albalucci by the FBI, right? Questions sent and then asked by the CIA interrogators on behalf of the FBI of Mr. Albalucci while he's being tortured or while he's been sleep deprived or after he's lost, 20 some pounds in weight because he's not being fed properly, things like that, right? And here are the answers that are then being brought back to the United States, incorporated into the 9/11 investigation as early as 2003, 2004, 2005, right? Here's the ongoing impact on Mr. Albalucci's mental health of those 3.5 years in custody. Then, when he's brought to Guantanamo, here are all the ways, and I can't go into detail about this, but what I can tell you are, here are all the ways in which that state of mind, that fear that was incorporated, that was encoded in his brain, right? And we've had psychiatrists and brain specialists talk about this. Here are the ways in which that fear was maintained intentionally at Guantanamo so that he would then provide the same answers to the FBI, who already knew what he'd said at the black sites, that he said at the black sites.
Yeah, I remember our last interview where I think you showed the difference between his handwriting after times that he was scared, or psychologically driven to give the same answers. Um, how do you get trained for that if you're an FBI agent?
I don't know that there's any training for, torture interrogations. We try, I think, and the FBI will tell you they pride themselves on, on conducting clean interrogations. In fact, one of the FBI agents memorably said last fall that all the information they got from the CIA black sites was, excuse my language, a flaming black bag of crap, because of the way in which those interrogations took place. And so then they came in thinking, we're going to do the clean interrogations, but they knew when they did them, they were doing them at a former black site, Camp Echo 2 at GITMO, where some of the men had already been held and tortured previously. They knew what the men had already said under horrific conditions of confinement, and they also knew, to a certain extent, the conditions of confinement in which the men were then at that point being held at Camp 7, which is famously the most secretive camp at Guantanamo.
So is it, just so I have a fuller understanding as a layman, the parts of the briefing that are classified and that you're not allowed to talk about tend to do with procedures and processes that the FBI and GITMO personnel inflicted or whatever onto the detainees? Is that basically it?
Yeah, the classified parts tend to be, details about the personnel involved. We don't have names and we don't ask for names. We're not trying to identify or out anyone in particular,
Right.
right? Or put anyone in danger. But the classified details tend to be about the personnel who were involved, about the specific conditions at Camp 7 during that period of time, about, there is a sentence in the SSCI report where the Senate came to the conclusion, or the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence came to the conclusion, that the CIA had operational control over Camp 7 for some period of time after the men were brought there. And that has been a source of contention. The government says that's a Senate report conclusion. And I can't confirm or deny anything beyond that sentence, that
Right.
Senate report.
Is this what are the ramifications? What are the possible ramifications of this case?
Um,
I know it's a tough question. Sorry, maybe I should expand a bit. Like, if it goes the government's way, I'm assuming nothing will change, and if it doesn't, then maybe reforms or whatever. Isn't there like a push from people inside the government even to close down Gitmo? Like, enough is it? Enough is enough, sort of thing.
Certainly, and there's been a concerted effort over the past few years even to resolve these cases before the military commissions, because they've gone on for so long with so little result for anyone, right? I mean, we have 9/11 victim family members who have for a long time wanted to see some sort of closure, and these trials, based as they are on torture, or they've not even gone to trial, right? There's not even been a trial for them, and so this has not been an effective, an efficient, or even any kind of satisfactory procedure for them. For my client, right, he continues to deteriorate from the terrible conditions and terrible, lack of medical care at Guantanamo. We're looking for medical care for him. Um, and for the government, it's just a losing proposition. I mean, if these statements are in fact suppressed, they lose the bulk of their evidence against these men in a massive criminal trial. And so it would be to everyone's benefit really to resolve these cases. Now, if the statements are suppressed, it would be a really, I think, a very strong affirmation of the values that we, the United States, put out into the world, that torture is in fact one of the prohibited high crimes, that the fruits of torture have to be expelled from courtrooms wherever possible. I mean, these are the values that we teach, that we try to export, that torture is not effective in interrogations. Our police and our FBI train foreign governments on their conduct of interrogations, and we train them not to do these things. So it would be a pretty powerful affirmation of our own values.
Is there a part of this that really speaks to the idea of there needing to be? I think the Bush administration officials said that they wanted the closest thing to outer space where there is no law of the land, and so they found that GITMO serve that purpose. GITMO, by the way, is a piece of land in Cuba that has been leased. I believe it's in perpetuity or something, by the United States. The irony of all ironies, which is that it's in Cuba, just because of the relationship that the United States has with Cuba. But is that really the main pillar of trying to find a way to access human rights in a place that seems to be a black hole when it comes to human rights?
It is extraordinarily difficult. There has been a naval base at Guantanamo Bay for a very long time, going back, decades and decades. And to be honest, the Cuban government has tried getting rid of us several times, but they haven't been able to. And so, yes, I mean, it is a place where it has been extraordinarily difficult over 22 years to get any recognition that US and international law apply there. And even now we struggle. I mean, at the military commissions, I've often said we have the American flag flying over a courtroom in which the government lawyers argue the Constitution does not apply. And that's still the reality of it. I mean,
that seems un-American. Sorry to cut you off, Alka. But I just have to say that seems really un-American.
It feels un-American. It feels un-American. It's a base. We listen to the national anthem every morning at 8 a.m. and then we go into the courtroom and we argue over whether the Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendment due process protections apply to men who the government wants to execute. Right? It feels extraordinarily un-American.
It's funny. I was in Washington, D.C. for the first time last year. And as a Canadian, I've been seeing all these historical landmarks on my TV screen or movie screen or whatever since I was a little kid. And you can't, I couldn't help but feel kind of almost patriotic. It's weird. As a person who's not American, just seeing and then when you hear about cases like this, the end of this movie should be, Your Honor, we are going to shut down the base in Guantanamo Bay, and then the American, that music kicks in and everyone gives high fives and everything, because that would be the most American ending, I think, to a story like this. There was a dark time in your history and you kind of overreached, not you, the royal you, right? You overreached, and the lack of humanity shown towards the victims in this case is the only real thing that allowed you to be able to do it. You wouldn't be able to do this to Quakers or something.
No.
You know what I mean?
It is dehumanization of Muslim men, of color, right? Non-citizen Muslim men.
So when are you going to, these processes take forever, but when is the decision supposed to be made in this particular case?
So we can't predict for absolutely. We are still in the process of hearing witness testimony on this motion. And so, for example, over the past couple of months, we've had one of the psychologists involved in developing the CIA torture program, Dr. Mitchell, testify in February. We had one of our psychiatric experts, Dr. Charles Morgan, testify about, he's a brain expert. He testified about the impact of torture on Mr. Al-Baluchi. We're going to have another CIA psychologist, Dr. Jessen, hopefully testify in the next couple of months. We still got a couple of FBI agents who are going to testify. We are, the judge has tentatively told us that he would like us to provide summary oral argument on this motion, summarizing all the testimony and the evidence that's been put in November. And we would hope that for a decision sometime after that. But, there are no guarantees at the military commissions or with anything having to do with Guantanamo. But that's the hope.
Okay. Well, listen, I'll let you go in about 2 minutes here. I just wanted to know, as a person that, went through law school and started practicing, did you ever think that this would end up being largely what your career would be focused on?
I genuinely don't. I do, I'll tell you two pieces of information, right? The first is that on one of my first days of law school, I was at Columbia. One of our civil procedure professors, a giant really named Michael Dorff, gave us a speech about ethics. And the example he gave us was one of the White House General Counsel memos authorizing the use of torture. This was in 2004. This had just been declassified, right? And he was like, essentially the gist of the speech was, this is the kind of lawyer you do not want to be, right? This is what we don't do. And then, I specialized in international law and human rights in law school. And with a focus on war crimes and crimes against humanity, I always thought I would be abroad at the international tribunals, right? I
Mm.
never ever thought I would be using that specialization and that expertise to litigate against my own government, right? And it is something that is, I do feel that it's patriotic, but at the same time, it can be demoralizing.
Is there a reason? Is it just because the United States doesn't recognize the validity of the ICC, or is there an appetite at the ICC to do something and to what like what they did with Netanyahu and Hamas, and I think Putin has a case there right now as well. Is there no appetite for that? Do they just, well, we're not going to bother because they won't recognize it? What is the situation there?
Oh, a few years ago, there was in fact an effort by the ICC. They've had open for a long time an investigation into what they call the situation in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
And that was supposed to encompass both crimes committed by the Taliban, right, and associated forces there, and crimes committed by US forces and US entities in Afghanistan. And the reaction from the Trump administration was to personally sanction the ICC prosecutor and other people in her office at the time. It was Fatou Bensouda, a different prosecutor. Um, and so, those sanctions remained in place for, I think, a couple of years. And then when the Biden administration came in, the sanctions were eventually lifted, not immediately, though. We were expecting an immediate lifting, and they took their time in lifting the sanctions. But was made clear to the ICC prosecutor that the United States, if you want the United States' support in any of these prosecutions, you will not come after U.S. entities. And so the current prosecutor, Karim Khan, basically got rid of the part of the investigation that involved U.S. entities and maintained the part of the investigation that was looking at Taliban and other groups in Afghanistan. There was a big outcry from people like me, and other human rights organizations who believed that we, number one, they had jurisdiction to look into it because it was on the territory of Afghanistan, and number two, if we believe in the rule of law and a court that we helped set up, that we helped write the statute for, even if we're not a party to it, we should, either encourage their investigation or at least not interfere with it, or conduct our own investigation, which then would result in the ICC not being able to do it, right? If we're conducting our own investigation, then
Yeah.
they don't have standing to do it.
Yeah, it's always seems strange when you say we'll stop helping you seek justice if you turn those wheels of justice towards us.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It's just the height of, right? It's just basic hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll end this podcast the same way I ended it the last time and ask you how you're doing, because I know this is tremendously stressful, and I'm not, you seem like you seem like you make it look easy, and I know it's not. So I was wondering how are you doing these days, and how is it impacting your mental health, and is everything okay?
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to ask. It is, I will say it is difficult, and it has gotten more difficult as time has gone on because
Mm.
we are very much immersed both in the details of September 11th, which of course are always horrific, right?
Yeah.
22 years later, even now, are just shocking and awful. But also in the details of Mr. Al-Baluchi's torture. I mean, every day, I sit with those details and I'm writing something about it or litigating something about it or preparing for a witness on it. And so it has been difficult, but we try to maintain a focus on mental health among the team members, and going out and making time for family and all of that. But I will say just the ability to do this work and to speak to you and speak to the media about as much as we can about it and put it out into the public domain is one way in which we feel some sort of fulfillment about it. Like the people know what is happening at Guantanamo.
Well,
And I
listen,
should,
yeah,
before we end, if you don't mind, I should actually mention, or
please.
my DA handlers will get mad at me. Nothing I say represents the opinion of the Department of Defense ever. and,
Pretty sure
and
no one thought that, but yes, it's a good disclaimer to have.
yeah, and nothing I say ever confirms or denies information the government considers to be classified.
What, duly noted. Listen, I think that you do a hero's work, and I think that I think it's very impressive. I wish you well, and I wish you luck in this case. And I'll try to have you back maybe at the end of the summer, and maybe you can give me an update if there's any update to give at that time.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Alka Pradhan, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Same here.
Oh, she's delightful. And she has one of the hardest jobs ever, especially for an attorney. So we'll keep you up to date on that case. If you wanted to go look up Amar Al Baluchi's case, you could go Google it, and it's horrendous, and it's one of those situations. It is probably the crystallized case study of a case that involves a person that was rounded up after 9/11, tortured, brought to black sites, brought to Gitmo. He went through the entire gauntlet. So we'll see if the wheels of justice do turn directly towards the United States government or whoever it's directed to. I don't want to misspeak because I am. Okay. We just went dead there for a second. I'm going to end it there without any outro music. We will see you on Casual Friday on Black Belt. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I really appreciate it.